Will Smith recently... Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Godbreaker. A man who rules the world takes on the Asgardian god of thunder in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Godbreaker at online booksellers today. Will Smith decided to respond to comedian Chris Rock's Netflix comedy special, Selective, Outrage, and his response to basically being roasted by Chris Rock in the last 2 minutes of his Netflix comedy special is one of the most pathetic things I have ever heard a man ever say. Now, according to reports, Will Smith said that he and Jada did not see Chris Rock's Netflix comedy special, Selective Outrage. However, it is said that he was embarrassed and hurt, and that the whole comedy special, in his eyes, was completely distasteful. Now, Chris Rock's whole comedy special, Selective Outrage, drew a lot of ire for jokes about R. Kelly and Michael Jackson, but the last 2 minutes of the special about Will Smith should have been something that outraged Will Smith, because the person who he really has issue with and should have been expressing his outrage to was his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Now, if Will Smith had some backbone and some stones and expressed outrage at Jada Pinkett Smith for disrespecting him, maybe he wouldn't be in this situation where he was cooked and roasted on a Netflix comedy special over a year later. Now, the reason why Will Smith basically got cooked and roasted in the last 2 minutes of Chris Rock's Selective Outrage is because he refused to be outraged about the disrespect he received from his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. Now, Jada Pinkett went on a Red Table Talk with her husband to discuss an affair that she had been having with his son's best friend, August Alsina. And over the course of this discussion with Will Smith, Jada Pinkett basically openly disrespected Will Smith, and Will Smith just basically sat there and took it like a bitch. And as he sat there and took it like a bitch, and then allowed himself to be emasculated on a social media platform that he was basically financing for his wife, he basically showed the world that he was not a man who was out here who deserved respect, because he refused to have respect for himself to stand up and check a wife who was completely out of pocket. And because he refused to check a wife who was completely out of pocket and decided to stay in a bad marriage for life, he was sitting there seething in anger at his wife as he was being celebrated at the 2022 Oscars for his brilliant performance as Richard Williams in King Richard. And what should have been the greatest night of his life became the worst night of his life, all because Will Smith refused to navigate through his emotions and refused to deal with a wife who basically showed how little respect for him that she had, as he was sitting there and Chris Rock was doing a monologue where he made the joke about Jada Pinkett being in G.I. Jane 2 because she had a shaved head at the time. And after he made this joke, he knew nothing about Jada Pinkett's alleged alopecia, and I say alleged because usually people who have alopecia wind up with a completely bald head, not like what Jada Pinkett is presenting, because I believe that she's possibly passive-aggressively going out here doing this despite Will Smith. And after Chris Rock made this joke, what happened was Jada Pinkett telegraphed a look at Will Smith, who laughed at the joke, and then Will Smith stormed up on the stage and slapped comedian Chris Rock, telling him to keep his wife's name out of his bleeping mouth. Now, after Will Smith slapped Chris Rock, Chris just wasn't fazed, and him being fazed just allowed him to take control of the narrative, because Will Smith basically showed that he had no control over himself on his night, and he let a woman who basically had no respect for him, control his life to the point where she could go out here and get him to embarrass himself, because Will thought, oh, I'll create a covert contract with Jada where I'll go out here and slap Chris Rock and this will get me her respect, not understanding that this woman never had any respect for him, because this woman sat there and went on on the show that he financed, Red Table Talk, because Jada didn't get her any money, I believe, to do this show on her own. She was living off of Will's money, and I believe she went out here, and again, this is a show that he financed, and she's gonna let him get himself get disrespected on a show that he financed, and sit there and go out here and have a discussion about an affair that was done on him, on his dollar. And again, Chris Rock made that whole point in his own Netflix comedy special as he was cooking and roasting Will Smith. But when I look at it again, he's sitting up here talking about how he's embarrassed and hurt about getting cooked on that show, instead of sitting there and realizing that the source of his problem is Jada Pinkett. Because to sit there and say you're embarrassed and hurt, those are emotional words from a female, and it just shows me how emasculated Will Smith is, and it shows me how his testicles are not only in the change purse of Jada Pinkett's Birkin bag, it shows me that that Birkin bag is locked up in a vault in an undisclosed location, and Will Smith has no bat balls whatsoever and no access to his balls, because if he had access to his balls, he would not allow himself to be disrespected like this, or continue to go on like some neutered puppy, going along and saying that I'm gonna stay in a bad marriage for life with a woman who continues to disrespect me, and to sit there and then say, oh, I'm embarrassed and hurt, and that Chris Rock was hitting Jada Pinkett below the belt when he went out here and made the Netflix comedy special Selective Outrage. No, Chris wouldn't have had to have made a Netflix comedy special Selective Outrage had Will Smith had some outrage as related to how he was being disrespected by a wife who clearly does not want to be in the marriage anymore, even though she says she's about the bad marriage for life. No, she's about the big money that Will Smith has, and what Will needs to do in order to reclaim his manhood was to go out here and check Jada Pinkett by filing for divorce. Unfortunately, since Will Smith refuses to file for divorce, what he does is sit here wandering, trying to figure out what type of man he wants to be, not understanding that he's basically shown the world that he's a pathetic chump, and that this pathetic chump image he's presenting is not going to be good for him long term, because once people see that you're the kind of guy who basically does not want to make any effort at change, people start to lose respect for you in social circles. So Will is going from being the guy that lost the respect of his wife to the guy who's going to lose respect in business circles, and he's lost respect in business circles because over the course of his so-called apology tour for his movie Emancipation, he was out here saying, oh, I understand if you guys don't want to see the movie. No, that's not how a man with confidence goes out here when he's out here promoting the project. Because when I'm out here promoting the project, like the recent book, John Haynes, Godbreaker, I'm bringing all of my confidence because I believe the very best as related to the project. But Will Smith didn't have that confidence. No, he's sitting up here looking like a sad sack, hoping to try to win people over with pity. But with pity comes people's contempt. And Will Smith looking up there, oh, I hope you understand about the slap and everything. Again, coming across as weak, whereas Chris Rock was coming across as strong. And he was able to, again, take control of the situation. And as he took control of the situation, what he did was remain silent. And as he remained silent, he wound up elevating his brand at Will Smith's expense. Because while Chris Rock was at the Oscars, he understood that this was a business and he was working that night. Whereas Will Smith did, while he was out here, he was so caught up in his feelings about Jada Pinkett that he wasn't thinking about taking care of business, of cementing his legacy as a superstar. Because Will Smith, again, on the greatest night of his life, was so caught up in his feelings about this bust down Jada Pinkett that all he was thinking about was, oh, how can I win her over? When it was already over, this woman was emotionally unavailable, and she was basically tired of this man and looking for a way to get this guy to embarrass himself so that he would go out here and lower his value, because she was tired of him. She didn't want anything to do with him outside of his money. And since she had such contempt for him, she was looking to destroy him overall. But the whole thing is, Will Smith didn't value himself as a man, even though he's considered to be a so-called high-value man. It was his low self-esteem that led to him undermining his greatest success on Oscar night, where he was going to win the Academy Award for his brilliant performance as King Richard. Had he navigated through his emotions, he would have had the greatest moment of his life, and he would not have given Chris Rock the ammunition to go out here and be able to barbecue him at the last 2 minutes of his Netflix comedy special. Now, Chris Rock taking Will Smith to the barbecue in the last 2 minutes of his Netflix comedy special, Selective Outrage, was incredibly brilliant as related to strategy, because Chris Rock sat there, again, remaining silent over the course of the year, driving up the price as related to getting his thoughts on the slap. And as he did this, Netflix paid him $40 million for 2 comedy specials, and he waited until the last 2 minutes. Again, brilliant strategy, because he's sitting there and getting people to buy the subs for Netflix, earning all of that $40 million, and sitting there waiting until the last minute, getting you to watch the entire show, and then coming in and taking Will Smith to the barbecue and turning the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air into the Fresh Simp of Bel-Air. Again, brilliant strategy as related to Will Smith, who has been sitting up here begging and pleading for people to like him, looking like a pathetic chump, and again, looking like a pathetic chump with this response where he's basically looking like a complete, like Chris Rock called him, a bitch, and looking like a complete wimp, because to say he's embarrassed and hurt, again, this is feelings, not logic, because a man with logic would just sit there and say, I have no comment on this comedy special because I ain't watched it, and I have no intentions of ever watching it, because at this point I'm looking to go out here and rebuild myself. That is what a man would go out here and say, who had discipline and character. Unfortunately, Will Smith doesn't have any discipline and character, because he has been emasculated and neutered by his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, and it's clear who wears the draws in that family, and it's clear that it ain't Will Smith, who looks like he's possibly wearing those skid mark jockey thongs of Jada Pinkett, and she's the one who is acting like she is the chief who wears the briefs, because at the end of this beef, he's been humiliated and just made into a complete clown. And again, Will Smith, this response is one of the most pathetic things I have ever seen. And it's pathetic because it shows me that Will Smith has no intention of looking to make any sort of change, and he's never had any intention of looking to make any sort of change, and he'd rather stay at the bottom and continue to be abused by Jada Pinkett in a codependent relationship, rather than stand up in like an interdependent man and stand up for himself like a man. That is the saddest part about Will Smith that makes me lose all respect for him, is that he refuses to make any sort of serious change, and he's more afraid of change than he is of Jada Pinkett, because if he was a man, he would understand that this situation is toxic, and the only way out of his so-called open marriage is for him to go out here and walk out of the door. Because any man out here, they would have said, okay, after this woman has just told me about this so-called entanglement, the first thing they would be doing is packing up all of her stuff. And then after they pack up all of her stuff, they drop her off at August Alsina's house and let them know, this is your woman now, and I'm done with this woman. Again, a high-value man with confidence and high self-worth, when he hears that his wife is out here with his son's best friend, what he does is send her to that son's best friend to go out here and have all the entanglements she wants, because as he cuts ties with her, he doesn't have to deal with all of the stress and the drama. No, that's that other man's problem at that point. But unfortunately, Will Smith was so caught up in his ego and so embarrassed about being humiliated by Jada Pinkett that he doesn't have any sort of confidence to go out here and check a raggedy hood rat female and let her know who the man is, because that's the problem with Will Smith. Again, he made these beta male terms talking about an open marriage, and when Jada opened the door to an entanglement, he wanted to try to change up the script. Unfortunately, what happened was he was shown up as related to his open marriage, and that's the thing that leads to his emasculation and also leads to his humiliation overall. And that's the thing that's really got him upset, is that this little LSD, little sexual deviant, got over on him as related to his little covert contract where he thought, oh, I'll have the open marriage, I'll have all of the women. But at the end of the day, while he was having the women, she went out here and found a dude, and that's the thing that bruises his ego. And while he's sitting up there trying to stay in this bad marriage, he's sitting up there looking like a fool and making everybody get over on him, just like Jada Pinkett got over on him as related to his so-called game, which was weak from the beginning, and Chris Rock got over on him in business as related to the business game. Will Smith was a $20 million man and was making big money, but instead of him making big money, he had one big flop with emancipation, his desperate attempt to try to win an Oscar by trying to get the favor of the Academy. But the Academy and the people at the Golden Globes had no respect for Will Smith after giving him an Oscar for King Richard, because Will Smith did not take his respect. And I believe that what's going to happen in the future is that Will Smith is not going to be the big star that he used to. No, while many people say they want to work with Will Smith, he's not going to be the box office champ, because people don't respect pathetic people. And people don't want to spend money to go see a pathetic man who refuses to go out here and make changes to his life. No, people refuse to spend money on a guy who acts like a loser. And now that people know that Will Smith is a loser who just won't make any efforts to change, people are going to change whatever movies that they watch. And I believe Bad Boys 4 would be a complete flop, because we see that the bad boy ain't as bad as we thought he was. No, we see that the bad boy is just a little punk. And now that we know that the bad boy is a little punk, we have no incentive to go out here and watch him in any movies, because that's the thing that Will Smith didn't understand about him being a star and his image, was that when you go out here and let this woman go out here and control you, she's going to take you on a path to destruction. And now Will Smith's brand is completely damaged, and his pathetic responses show us that he's a star we don't need to shine a light on. Now, if you want to pick up some of my men's issues books so that you don't wind up becoming a pathetic simp like Will Smith, you can find my books Stop Simpin', Why Men Don't Need Finance to Get Romance, and Stop Simpin' in the Workplace, Stop Simpin' in Cyberspace, The Man Crisis on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can also find it at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And if you want to learn how to avoid a woman like Jada Pinkett, you can pick up my book, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, and that book will show you why women like Jada Pinkett usually wind up single and wind up residing in a place like Bust Downtown, and that's something I talk about in my other book, The Woman Crisis. And if you want to see me do more videos taking celebrities to the barbecue, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose. The man who rules the world runs into the irresistible force of a man with nothing to lose in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get the regular and variant editions of John Haynes, the man with nothing to lose on Amazon.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business at paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.